Hi everybody, it's Michael Hollands for Sound of the Movies. Today I'm here at Soundtrack Cologne in Cologne, Germany, and I'm joined by Mr. Bruce Broughton, who is certainly one of Hollywood's most experienced and best film composers. And today he will also be given a Lifetime Achievement Award. And thank you so much for joining me here, Bruce.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Bruce, which aspects of movies fascinates you the most?
Writing the music. Well, I mean, obviously, because I'm a composer, but one of the things I like about writing movie music is that there's a lot of variety in it. So you're never writing the same thing once. You're never quite sure what style you're going to use. There are always problems to solve, and no, that's the part that I really like the most.
Okay. What inspires you? Is it the characters or a screenplay, or how do you usually get your creative juices flowing?
Well, too quickly, I usually answer a question like that as saying I have inspiration by desperation, because everything is it's all deadlined. You know, it has to be done by a certain day. So you really can't sit around and wait too long for a great idea. But on a larger sense, I mean, the thing that motivates your idea is whatever the story is that you're playing to, or what element of the story you're playing to. Because sometimes you may have what looks like a crime drama, but what you're really playing is a love story, or you're playing a story about some secondary element, because the crime story is large enough and doesn't need your help. So you pay attention to the kind of thing that you're working on for the story and get ideas for that.
Okay. I understand that you had quite a strong relationship with Peter Hyams.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he did 4 movies, if I'm...
3. Well,
he produced
one. He produced the first one, yeah.
And he directed 3. I think it was Presidio, Narrow Margin, and Stay Tuned.
Right.
How would you describe your work relationship with Peter?
Well, Peter is very, very professional, and when he works, he demands a lot of professionalism from you, I mean, basically. And so he can be very demanding, and he's very specific about what he wants and how he wants it, and if he doesn't like something, he'll certainly let you know. But in that, I got a lot of respect from him, because even though sometimes we had some really difficult things to get through, his working method was actually so good and so admirable. I learned a lot of stuff from him, and so I would say that overall, the relationship on my end anyway was really good and worthwhile.
Okay, Peter has done, when he still directs movies, did you sort of part ways at a certain point?
No, I think that I never talked to him about this, but I think he had sort of a rule of thumb that he didn't want to work with anybody more than 3 times.
Really?
Because there are a lot of it, like Jerry. I think Jerry Goldsmith did 3 movies with him. I did 3 movies with him. I think John Debney did 3 movies with him. I mean, and some guys only did 1, so some of them couldn't take the pressure, I guess. But But I don't think that he ever settled on anybody as being. It's not like Steven Spielberg and John Williams.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that was just the way that he was.
Okay.
And for whatever reason, he would pick, this composer or that, and it was, I think, actually, oddly enough, even if he wasn't entirely happy with what he got, if he thought that he had a really good composer, he would hire them again. So, but I don't. I've thought about that. I never got a chance to talk to him after my 3rd movie, but I think that was sort of the way he did business.
Okay, but now that you mention it, I think that sounds just about right.
Yeah.
3 movies each, and John Debney, I think End of Days was the first.
I don't know what John did with him, but I remember John working with him a few years after I did. So I mean, once you understand that, that's just, again, I think with him, it was really his way of being professional. I mean, I think that he had a way of doing movies, and when it came to composers, that was, what he did. And the composers weren't always the same sort of composer. I mean, John and Jerry and I are sort of similar. But he had other guys there who were much different than what we would do. Yeah, so I mean, I think that's what he did.
Yeah.
That's a guess.
You also worked with other important directors, Lawrence Kasdan, you worked with Barry Levinson, and what do you think is the most important, let's say, characteristic that a director should have when working with a composer in terms of communication and understanding musical knowledge?
I think that's a lot of confusion for directors, and it's a lot of confusion for composers. But I think it's easier made if everybody focuses not on the music but on the story. Most of the directors don't really know very much about music, and a lot of them are intimidated by music because they don't know. I mean, it's the one part of movie making they really don't have any control over, and they can't speak about. I mean, they generally know about lighting and cinematography and all this other kind of stuff, but music they don't know. In fact, recently a director friend of mine called me. He was working with somebody else, and he was having a hard time with a composer.
Okay.
And he said, I can't get this guy to understand, what I want. And he says, I don't know anything about music. I don't know how to talk to him. And I said, look, just talk about your movie. It's your composer's issue to try and, or it's your composer's job to try and get your movie the way you want it in terms of story. So I would say the ones that were most successful were the ones who were able to do that. Once they start talking about the music, it gets on difficult ground. It gets hard for them, and it gets really hard for the composer because composers know a lot about music, and you get to be very specific. If you're starting to talk about the trombones or the oboe or the violins, you don't know whether they're actually talking about the real instrument or not, and if what they're hearing is what they're talking about. But if they talk about the picture is, I'll give you an example talking about Peter Hyams. We were working on, I guess it was Narrow Margin, and I was playing the end credits, which was based on the main title. And he said, this is supposed to be scary, but you have it sad. It sounds like sad. Okay, he didn't say the violins are too high or the melody is too blah blah blah. He didn't say it. He said scary, sad. He gave me words that I could understand for what he was talking about. So I said, oh, okay. So I went home and I rewrote it, and it ended up with something kind of scary or suspenseful. I don't remember. There was an S word. And then when I played it for him, he says, wow, can you make a main title like that too? I said, yeah. So I did another main title. So we ended up with 2 main titles and 2 end credits, based upon his feeling about what I had done, and it was strictly his feeling. But he didn't say anything about trombones or bass drums or anything like that. He just gave me the emotional characteristic.
Okay, I think many directors might be, let's say, intimidated if a composer starts talking in technical terms, would you like it in, in flats or in major?
Well, look, I mean, I say sometimes to people, you don't want to be very specific with your directors when you're talking about music. If you ask them, who's your favorite composer, now you're in trouble, because if they say something like Stravinsky, then you're going to want to know which Stravinsky. And then if they give you a name of a piece, you're going to ask them which section. You're going to get very specific because you want to please this guy. You want to do a good job. And maybe all he wants is just big dramatic chords like the Rite of Spring or something. But if he says the Rite of Spring, that's different. That's a big piece, So it's very hard. When I did Silverado, Larry Kasdan wasn't musical, and I mean he didn't try to be, and I don't think he was intimidated by it, but he just couldn't talk about it. But he did tell me what he wanted in terms of a style. He said, I want a big traditional Hollywood Western. And he could have said whatever that is, But the thing is, he knew it when he heard it. So I had to figure out what that was, and then give him something that satisfied that desire that he wanted for his picture. Because the reason he said that, he was making a picture that was supposed to be in the style of the old Hollywood traditional Western, And so there was a part of it that I had to understand, and he had to tell me something very specific so that I could understand it. But he didn't say anything about. I think at one time we were recording it, and he was asking for something, and I said, "Are you tired of the timpani yet?" He goes, "Never, never." You know? And he liked French horns. I mean, he knew that much about it, you know, because those were Western things. So that was about as musical as he got. But
Okay.
other than that, he really didn't know. He did. We had one thing I had to change when we recorded the main title, and I knew it as soon as I heard it. I had written it too fast. You know, it was just too fast. And I thought, well, too bad. You know. And then he said afterwards, I think that thing's too fast. Can you slow it down? And because he was talking about the energy that was being put into the film in that spot, it was just too much at that time, you know. So I thought, oh, okay, because he got it. I mean, I knew it, and he knew it too. And as long as he knew it, that was the deciding factor, you know. So I changed it, and it became whatever it is. It wasn't. I mean, it was not a hard fix. It was really easy. But
Okay. In terms of musical quality, you know, today versus, let's say, 30 or 40 years ago, I mean, I have often felt that the quality is not quite on the same level as it used to be. You know, in terms of the melodic structure, or there are less themes and so on. Would you say it comes with the territory? It's just the nature of the business because of the evolution of music, or would you say it's a generation problem because so many old directors are now not working anymore?
what dead?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, actually, yes to all of that. I think like this morning, I was listening to a new pop song that was getting some attention, and I thought, boy, what a lousy melody. You know, I mean, in terms of a melody, it was really lousy, but in terms of production, it was spectacular. You know, the lyrics were clever, but they were dopey compared to a lyric that I would like from a song from from a classical song. Yeah, some of it's generational, some of it's style. I think movies went through a huge change, even with music, once the medium became digital.
Yeah.
Because it used to be, when you're working with film, if you were in that final process of putting the soundtrack together, if the director made a choice to, let's say, change the position of a scene, that was hard. I mean, you had to take the film down, literally take the film down, and you had to wind down to that spot, and you were using film. So you had to find the spot, and then you had to physically cut it, and then physically mend it. And then, it took a long time to do that. Now it takes a couple of seconds because you do it digitally, So if you make a digital change in the picture, you have to make a digital change in the music.
Yeah.
And if you have these long, beautiful melodies and these long things like, we used to do, they're hard to cut. Whereas if you have a loop, they're really easy to cut. So you find a lot of this music being sort of in the same key. I went to hear, well, I won't say what the movie was. It wouldn't be fair. But I went to hear a movie, a big movie that's just out now. And the guy who's a composer did a job that was sort of in the Hans Zimmer school of big chords and loops and things like that. But you could tell this guy had a musical education because there were more chords than usual, And the way that he went from chord to chord, and the way that he laid out his cues. I actually went to see the film a second time just to hear the score. The way he laid out his cues, you could see this is a guy who had an education, but he was writing in a style. I've seen things that this fellow did on television shows, and he's good. I mean, he's really good, but he adapts his style to whatever the picture is, to match the picture. So if you do a score like like some of the stuff that we were looking at last night, like The Boy Who Could Fly or something like that, that's a score from a long time ago, and it has an old style. If I had a picture like that now and tried to do I don't think I'd do a score like that. In fact, like Silverado, when we were recording when we were making a CD, several years ago, I had the score in front of me, and I was looking at it and thinking, oh, this is really cool. I like the way I did this and that and that. And then it occurred to me that if I were to write that score today, I wouldn't write that score. Because for one thing, I'd have to do a mock-up. I'd have to put it into a synthesizer, and it would make the score sound stupid. So all of that energy and all that enthusiasm and all that stuff that people like about Silverado wouldn't be there. It would be much more contained and much more straightforward, and it wouldn't have all the neat stuff in it.
Yeah. I think in terms of the mock-ups, I think many producers and directors are sort of favor mock-ups because nowadays there are let's say these big blockbusters and they cost an enormous amount of money, and I think they feel like they're on a safe side when they listen to the mock-up, and they get the feeling of what it will sound like or might sound like when it gets fully recorded, because they are afraid they might have to book more sessions. When the composer just starts playing on the piano. I mean, it's really a difficult aspect, because I understand why they do it. They do it mostly because they can. Yeah.
But it's now I'm going to just talk about a composer. I don't want to sound like a whining composer, but it's really not a good idea to see a work in progress. I remember after Picasso died, there were a lot of stories about Picasso and a lot of shows about Picasso, but one of the things I remember were just two still photographs. One was he had a canvas and he had just made this huge line across it. And the second photograph was he was standing back looking at it, wondering what he was going to do next. Okay, well, if that had been a mock-up, the director would have said, well, why isn't there a red line in there, and there should be something here, and blah, blah, but Picasso didn't know what he was going to do, because he's waiting to know what he feels like, So I think that work in progress thing is not a good thing. The other thing is that mock-ups are better for certain things that are going to have that are going to be realized digitally at the end. Because mock-ups, let's face it, they're all digital. And you're putting in phony violins and phony clarinets, but they're all digitally recorded and messed around with. So if that's the kind of film you're going to end up with, you can even play the director some of the tracks that you're going to work with, and that'll be very successful. But if you're doing something, again, like Silverado or The Boy Who Could Fly or Star Wars, forget my stuff, any of that kind of stuff digitally, it's just not going to be the same. The other thing, the thing that sounds kind of artsy, but is actually true, at least in my mind, is that if you're working with a synthesizer and let's say you're working with a clarinet sound, and you hit a note, and it sounds like a clarinet, and it will sound like a clarinet, you can hit that note 1,000 times and it'll sound exactly the same, just like that clarinet.
Yeah.
But if you ask a clarinet player, a real guy, to play that note, every time he plays it, it's going to be different. And you can ask him to play it differently. You can ask him to play it this way or that way, and that's the human expression. That's the stuff that actually we feel. We don't just feel voltage control.
Absolutely.
My wife is a violinist, so she has a hard time listening to synthetic stuff. So when I play her things on the synthesizer, she often says, it needs to be faster. And I said, no, it doesn't. She says, yes, it does. It needs more energy. You need to play it faster. So I'll crank it up to be faster. She says, now, see, I'm right. And I said, no, you're not right, because if you were playing this, you would put all that excitement into it by your performance, and I wouldn't have to play it so fast. But, I mean, you'd be surprised at how fast some of this music is recorded these days, because they do it on a synthesizer, I think synthesizers are great, samplers are great, digital music is great.
Sounds great, yeah.
But you have to use it and you have to combine it. But it's that's a long answer to an easy question. Well, actually, it's not an easy question, but I think the question is really answered because things have changed. I said this to Randy Newman actually a year or so ago, and I said, because Randy's a really good musician.
Yeah.
He's a really good composer, and all that stuff. And I mean, he's a terrific songwriter, but he's a really good movie scorer. And I said to him, I don't want to seem stupid, but have you noticed how much music has changed in the last few years? And he looked at me and says, well, geez, he said, in 1955 we lost all the chords, meaning that once rock and roll came in, all the old songs that had all these beautiful chords and beautiful melodies were changed, because rock and roll was a really simple kind of music, and it's become even simpler over the years. So Yeah, I mean, it changed last Tuesday, but it also changed about 50 years ago, 60 years ago.
Absolutely. And to wrap up the mock-up thing, I think it's a good way of bringing across what the music can sound like, but machines can never replace human beings and the orchestras. And I think it was actually David Newman who once said, mock-ups are great, but they're not, let's say, 100%. Because if you play the strings or the cello, due to the bow articulation, it might sound very different than the digital result in the mock-up. So there's always a pro and a con to everything, I guess.
Well, see, like talking about David. Excuse me. David's a violinist.
Yeah.
So he knows that really well. I mean, he's a good orchestrator, he's a good composer, but he's a violinist. So it's not like being a pianist where you just play the notes, But the violin makes a very big difference how you use the bow and the pressure and the speed and all that other kind of stuff. So he knows that one really well. No, they're not very good for being emotionally expressive. But that's also another thing. I mean, it's the thing about being emotionally expressive is a stylistic thing, and we're sort of coming out right now from a very cool period when the music used to be very expressive and very inventive, and then music became very cool emotionally and sat back and you didn't want to do too much. People were afraid of expression. I think that's just beginning to change because movies are they're a commercial medium. They just go with whatever's going to make money. So if you make Star Wars, somebody else is going to make Star Wars. And if you make a comedy that does well, somebody else is going to make the same kind of a comedy that usually doesn't do as well, but they try to make money on whatever is popular. So it's show business. It's not the art business, and it's not the brain business.
No, so many movies that are released these days. I mean, it's not the brain business.
They're stupid. They're just stupid.
So, absolutely. I mean, there's still great stuff, great movies.
Oh yeah,
still being made.
But look, I mean, it's like I said this one time. I was at UCLA, and I was doing a talk about. Actually, I guess I was doing a talk about my music. And the lady who was leading the class does an awful lot of contemporary music. I mean, she's really great at that. And I said to the class, I said, let's face it, most music is stupid. And she just laughed. And I said, well, it is. I said, most music is not very good. Most art isn't very good. Most literature isn't very good. And most movies surely are not very good. Because when you get into the art of it, it's only a small bit that's really going to stick around for a while. For all the thousands of movies that have been made over the years, you can remember only maybe 20 of them. They're the classics.
Okay. Speaking of your movies, I think, or your scores. I mean, your musical style resonates with me a lot. But of all the scores you've done, I think my two favorites would be "Baby's Day Out," which we had a clip on yesterday, and "The Miracle on 34th."
Those are good choices.
Street. Thank you. I mean,
you're a John Hughes guy.
I am a John Hughes guy.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he's a terrific writer. He was a terrific writer, producer, and director, and I think he knew about music.
Yeah.
And what are your recollections on the Miracle on 34th Street?
Well, Miracle was the second movie I did with him, and when I say did with him, I mean he wrote it and produced it. His feeling, we were talking about Peter Hyams working with a composer 3 times. John was a little bit like that with directors. He had a lot of directors that he would hire, but they were doing his script. And his feeling about directors was that the script was much more important. That as long as you just did what was in the script, it didn't really matter too much who the director was. I mean, I hate to say it, but that was the way he was. However, if the director worked on one of his films and made money, he'd hire the director again. It was like a test, So he had some directors that he worked with quite a lot,
Chris Columbus?
Yeah, I think Chris was probably one of them.
Howard Deutsch?
Howie Deutsch did several of them. I mean, a lot of his movies did really well. But they were all based around John's movies. So when we did, I know you asked about Miracle, but let me...
Yeah, sure.
On
Go ahead.
Baby's Day Out, for one thing, he worked in Chicago. So you had to fly to Chicago. That's okay. Chicago's a great city, I'd never been there before anyway. you go to Chicago and you see the film. So we saw Baby's Day Out. The first time I saw Baby's Day Out, the director wasn't there. He didn't get along well with the director,
Okay.
which I don't think was unusual. And so I think we actually spotted the film, meaning we found all the music spots. I was there with my music editor. We went through the whole, and I went home and I started to write it. About 2 weeks into this, I got a phone call from John's office saying, you have to come back to Chicago and respot the film with the director. Oh, okay. Weird. That was really weird. But I wasn't paying for it. I didn't mind going back to Chicago again. So my music editor and I went back to Chicago and met the director. Nice guy, really nice guy. And John sat back. John had led the proceedings before, but this time he just sat in the back of the room and didn't say much. And I found out later that the reason he did that was because the director's version was doing better than his version. When they show it for tests and that kind of stuff. And because the director's version was playing better, even though he and the director didn't get along well, if that one was the one that was going to make money, the director was now in charge. So you talk to the director. So from that point on, the director and I got to know each other and became good friends, and all my dealings were with him, period. That was it. So, John was really a practical business guy. I remember on Miracle, there's one scene where I think two twins come up to Santa Claus, and the two twins are wearing matching sweaters. One's wearing the right side and one's wearing the left side. It's kind of a cute little moment. And my music editor said, I'll bet that's in the script. So she looked up the script, and sure enough, that was in the script. All those details were all in the script. He had so much, he had a lot of control. And he could make you nuts on the amount of control.
Detail specific.
No, he was very specific, very specific. But I liked him a lot. He was on Miracle on 34th Street. We got to Chicago, and he said, "How'd you like to go to the ranch and look at the movie, or the farm, or whatever he called it?" I said, "Yeah, sure." I didn't even know what he was talking about. "Yeah, sure. Okay, well, we'll do it tomorrow. We'll do it at the farm or the ranch, whatever it was." So a car comes and picks us up. And we drive for a couple of hours out to this place that he owned. Hundreds of acres, I guess. And we looked at the movie out there. I didn't know why, So we're sitting there, and usually to spot a film, to look at for all the music spots, it takes at least twice the length of the film. So if the film is 2 hours long, you figure you're going to be at least 4 hours, but it can take longer. This one was taking a long time. There's a lot of talking, and then somewhere towards the end of the morning, he said, "So, we ready to go three-wheeling?" And I went, "What?" And the director went, "Yeah." The director was a young guy. "Yeah, yeah." And I'm thinking, "What? Well, we're here looking at this movie." So we went outside, and he had these three-wheeler ATVs, like these little bicycles, motorized bikes. And I thought, this is weird. So my music editor hopped on behind me, and the director took one, and John took one, and we took a tour of his farm. We're driving hither and yon, and we're driving through cornfields, and we're driving up hills and down hills, and we'd stop, and he'd talk a little bit about it, and then he'd take off, and we'd follow the lead. We were doing a movie. We were working on a movie. It was the goofiest thing, but it was a lot of fun,
Right.
But he was always, his bottom line was he was always very serious about the business, always very serious about the business. And if he asked you a question, he expected that you were going to give him an intelligent answer, because his question was an intelligent question,
Okay.
So, it was a lot of fun. But having said that, I really enjoyed the movies. I enjoyed both those movies. I thought Baby's Day Out was hysterical. And I was disappointed when it didn't do better. Miracle on 4th Street, I think, is still a really lovely Christmas film.
It is. It's, I think, one of the most well-known Christmas movies out there.
Well, there's two of them.
Yeah.
There's that one and the original one,
Yeah, it's a remake, basically. But it's still so popular.
Well, that's good to know.
For good reason.
I can't tell, because one of the funny things about the movie was when I was working on it, the director said, I don't want this to sound like a Christmas movie. Now, this is one of the goofy things you get in Hollywood. When I did Tombstone, they said, don't want this to sound like a Western. You know, want this, and
Yeah.
so I called Jerry Goldsmith, because Jerry was supposed to have worked on the movie, and he knew all the people. I said, Jerry, they don't want it to sound like a Western, but the guys are, you know, riding horses and they're carrying guns, and he says, Bruce, do what you're going to do. That was his thing. So on Miracle, he said, I don't want it to sound like a Christmas movie. And I said, but you've got Santa Claus in it. He says, well, I want this to be a movie that anybody can look at any time of the year. I said, they're going to look at it in November. But the truth is, I've seen the show on TV in August, you know, in July. I mean, I don't know why, but in that way the director was sort of right. But there's a scene there where Santa Claus puts on his suit for the first time. And so it sounds very Christmassy, because I've got the choir going and this whole thing, you know. And I was playing him the mock-up, which wasn't very good. And he looked at me and he said, that sounds like Christmas music. And I said, you know what? It looks like Santa Claus. So anyway, it worked out okay, you know, it worked out fine.
Absolutely. I mean, but your score for Miracle is also, you know, widely popular, I think, and also re-released it as a 2 CD special edition, not by, I think it was either La La Land or Entrada.
Yeah.
And nowadays we have this big trend of scores getting expanded releases and so on and so forth. So, I mean, it's it's a great thing to see that music gets appreciated even more, and it does have an afterlife.
Well, that's the way of looking at it. I mean, I think sometimes the re-releases put too much music on it.
That's a con.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I'd rather have the album sound really good as an album. But I know they Entrada particularly, I guess La La Land does it too. Entrada puts out music for their fans, you know. So they put out everything, all the bad source music they wrote.
Okay, Bruce, I would love to continue, but I guess we're out of time for today.
Okay, too bad.
Yeah, absolutely.
This
I
was fun.
I thank you so much for your time. I totally appreciate it,
I
and
appreciate
maybe in the
it.
future we can do another one.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.